you. So I have been informed that the Euros start in 33 minutes, so I absolutely will get you out in time, don't worry. So here today, I'm going to talk about my unconventional route to Chief Product Officer, some of the things that I found really challenging, but also very rewarding, where I think the product role is evolving, and why you should all be really excited to be in product today. So I am the definition of a squiggly career. Just so I understand, how many people in here would also define themselves as someone with a squiggly career? Ooh, loads of you. Wonderful. You're going to love it then. So I've actually never done a product management role before I became Chief Product Officer at Onfido, which is a B2B identity verification software company with a product and design team of about 60 people. I thought that would actually sound quite unconventional, but since there are so many of you with squiggly careers, maybe slightly less so. So I think as most things in life, right, you can only connect the dots going backwards. And so here is my connecting the dots going backwards. Great. So firstly is, by the time I actually became Chief Product Officer, I had been at the company for 5 years. I was actually the Chief Strategy Officer, and in that 5-year period, I'd run international expansion, sales and account management, marketing, regulatory affairs, product innovation, monetization, and mergers and acquisitions, corporate strategy, and just lots of roles, basically. So I knew the business very well, I knew the market well, and I built a lot of relationships in the company over those 5 years. And as you all know, as product people, relationships are incredibly important. All of that did turn out to be incredibly important. The second piece is that I'd just been very product curious for a while. It seemed like a really cool role, and I've been doing a lot of the reading. I've been applying some of the frameworks, especially using things like going through Reforge courses as part of like international expansion and monetization. It turns out strategy and product have a lot of similar frameworks. And so I've been kind of watching it from the side, had worked with the product team, but I'd never officially been a product manager. I'd actually been an executive or leadership, C-suite, whatever you want to call it, at 4 different startups by that point. And so I was quite familiar with what an executive role looked like. I dealt with investors, boards, press, and so on. I'm very comfortable with finance, just having been an investment banker and also an angel investor for the last decade. And so sort of seen that part of the business, but again, not as the CPO. Lastly, so during that process, actually by coincidence, I'd also been like training to be an executive coach, just for fun, and hence had done a lot of self-reflection and also had this new coaching toolkit that I wanted to bring into the role and also into the company. And then the last bit, which I think is the ode to the squiggly careers, I think just by the nature of having a squiggly career, right, means that you basically have to have a great growth mindset. You need to be comfortable with self-directed learning a lot of new things, continuous learning, being really uncomfortable, having that beginner's mind, totally not being afraid to be like, I know this is probably a stupid question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. And I think actually a combination of these things actually probably stood me in good stead for a first-time role at a high-pressured CPO role in a scale-up growth company. And then about 6 months into the role, I did the CPO Accelerator, which is run by Products Labs, Melissa Perry. And it turns out, like most things in product, there is actually a framework for this. And although, of course, my own particular experience is unique, this isn't actually the experience. And it is not actually an anomaly, because there are different types of CPO roles, right? There's CPOs in smaller companies, there's CPO in growth stage companies, there's CPOs in enterprise companies. And actually, the top skills for a growth stage CPO, and I've kind of adapted this from some of the curriculum of the accelerator, looks much more like an executive role than it does a product management individual contributor role. So for those taking pictures, there's more details coming. So firstly, of course, yes, you need to know the strategy, you need to know the business, and you need to be able to understand the opportunities and be able to prioritize and then drive a product roadmap. Yes, that's probably very familiar to people. But the second one is about financial skills, right? And why does this matter so much? Well, because when you're actually an executive, you're driving the business, and product, especially in the kind of company that I was at, is such a core component of the business. So what decisions you make for monetization of the product, or how you drive pricing or packaging, or even how you do mergers and acquisition, fundamentally shapes where the business is going. In the same way that what happens on the other side of the business, for example, which channels you use to go to market, fundamentally affects the product. They're all incredibly intertwined, and having key financial skills was incredibly important. The next part, of course, is just general leadership and communication, right? You need to be able to motivate, inspire, and coach your teams. I think you can say that for pretty much any leadership role. Another component of that, of course, is be able to influence other people outside product into product thinking and product principles. And I hear that's come up a lot today, how you change the org. And then just communicating this, to be able to communicate this to everyone internally, all of the time. And then the last bit is this external stakeholders role. And I think this is the piece that probably does differ some of the VP roles with some of the CPO roles, if a CPO role exists in that company, because the role becomes incredibly external facing. Sales want to bring the CPO to say no or yes to the client. You're going to be doing a lot of just high stakes negotiations with customers, with prospects, policymakers, press, board, investors, you name it. It is an incredibly external facing role. And people also love having product people speaking at events recently. And so you'll also be doing a lot of speaking, a lot of blogging, webinars, etc. So that's what the framework looked like. What did it actually feel like in reality? So today I'm going to just go through 3 things that I thought were incredibly challenging, incredibly rewarding, like most things in life. So when I took the job, I'd obviously read all the books. I felt very inspired. I was going to escape the build trap, and we were going to do continuous user discovery. We're going to do great data-driven decision making, and we were going to prioritize beautifully, right? It was going to be wonderful. There is so much brilliant product literature out there, and I read it all, and I was like, okay, am I ready? Mostly. Let's see. And then I think there is the reality of what it's like to be a leader at a growth stage, B2B business, selling mostly into regulated industries in the middle of a big downturn, right? I took the role at the Q3 of 2022. That's probably one of the points of that downturn people remember for things that were going on. And so what did it actually look like? Well, the first thing is, the nature of being a big growth business is that you have a lot of clients. When you're a startup, you're winning clients. When you're an enterprise, it's probably different. But this is the stage where you have a lot of clients. You've been growing a lot, right? That's what's defined you. And so there's just a lot of product work that you just need to do just to keep the business going. And then the second part is, during that kind of environment where people are more risk averse, retention is absolutely critical. Retaining that dollar is so much easier than trying to win that extra dollar in the market. And so your current customers have more of a voice because they're going to be more risk averse. They're going to have, I would like to say, more demands, but even if they have the same number of demands and you've got all that maintenance, the big difference between 2022 and 2020 is that in 2020, your response will be like, great, let me hire more people. I need another team. I need to do the existing customer stuff. I need the new stuff. Well, no, that's not possible, right? That's the previous environment. So in this environment, you just have less. You have to do all of the stuff you need to do, and there's less left over, just by design, for new and innovation. And then, I know everyone thinks prioritization is why you go into product, right? It's so much fun. It is, but when you have this high stakes and this much to do, the conversations become incredibly high stakes. So I've read a lot in, ideal product literature, which is, product is really simple, right? You just take the important problem, you solve it. Then you just go to the next important problem, you solve that too. Well, what about when your problems are, is it this $2 million customer, or that $3 million customer, or this $2 million customer that I'm going to disappoint this quarter? Well, you can imagine how high stakes those conversations are. And just, I think by design, when you have less, you have to become more risk averse in where you can actually spend your precious product and engineering dollars. And so there is definitely, we managed to hold on to a small part of an innovation team working on, for us, digital identity, but that was very much a resource-constrained team. I think in a different environment, we probably would have staffed that team differently. So we managed to protect that, but then the rest, much more stuff needed a big dollar value attached to it to go forward and do it. And then even when you do manage, at least in our world, right, to ship some of these cool new features, we needed customers to upgrade often to be able to take advantage of them. The nature of being a big enterprise-facing B2B software company. And your customers are also just going to be more resource constrained. They're not going to have the same capacity to upgrade as quickly and get this into their hands of their end customers. They won't have as many engineering resources. They'll also become more risk averse. They're less willing to take part in beta programs or anything else that puts their own careers at risk, because on the other side, there are still humans. And then lastly, when these conversations become really tricky, like for your account management, customer success, or renewals teams, it's also just harder to, organize so many discovery conversations with them about new things. You'll just have less money lying around to be able to do surveys, go to events, go to conferences, pay for experts, and so on. There's just less of those resources to do a lot of the fun stuff I think people really love. Ooh, well, this is hard, right? This is not quite the environment that maybe a lot of people signed up for, but this was the reality for a lot of businesses over the last couple of years. And not only is it hard, I think it is particularly hard for the people who have to stand between the external and the internal and all the upheaval that's been going on with technology, i.e. product. That said, I would also flip it the other way, which is it's never more critical to be the role that is combining customers, the business, and technology. And I really say this from my perspective as someone who's been in quite a lot of roles where you don't get to decide what to build. There is nothing worse than irrelevance. Being relevant is amazing. Yes, it's hard, but it's amazing. Now, of course, the job is not necessarily what you think it's going to be. There are definitely things that I wish I could have done or done to a better standard than some of the things we were able to do. But fundamentally, I think what I've learned about the CPO role is, in this type of business, is the job of the CPO is whatever it needs to be for the business to achieve its goals. And this will look very different for everyone. I've got my one perspective in this talk. And so I'm going to split my CPO journey into two different pieces. One of the key underlying pieces is it isn't always going to be doing the most inspiring things from a product point of view. And yet, at the same time, you need to know that, make that decision, and still bring all of the product design and engineering teams along with you. And that's what makes it particularly challenging. So my CPO journey, part one, started with taking the role and immediately needing to make reductions, which is hard in any context, and then stabilizing the team, supporting the people and humans in the team, and then making some quite big, bold steps on where we were going as a product, and hence also business. And then improving some of our processes, which for us was particularly around how we interacted with growth. And so that's things like enablement, customer comms, introducing new products into the market, and then navigating a lot of organizational politics, because there's a reason you bring in a CPO like me, and getting things done. And then there is actually one of the things I inherited, which is very cool, is that Onfido has very high-functioning, cross-functional squads in how we develop products. So each of them consists of product managers, designers, engineers, applied scientists, data scientists, and also testing. And they are in some ways quite autonomous, and they work on their squad mission, which is usually a product or a piece of a product if the product is bigger. That is one of the best things about product development at Onfido. It's kind of what drove the company to where it got to. And it was actually going fine. And so that wasn't where I needed to spend my energy, even if from a product point of view, that probably would have been where the really fun stuff happened. And then the second part of my CPO journey was very much about the acquisition. And the number one goal was just to work with the exec team and making sure that the acquisition completed successfully for the business, which means the customers, the employees, and the shareholders, of which actually a lot of shareholders were also current and ex-employees. And so that became my top priority in what I did. I definitely had to make trade-offs on where I spent my time between working with the acquisition and also running the business. I think this line I've put down here, which is the executive team is your first team, is probably still the line that my leadership team were often most obsessed about as product people. Fundamentally, it makes sense, but I think that is the job. We got to a great exit. We closed 2 months ago, and we did reach our goals. But that balance between executive team being your first team, doing what's right for the business, but also inspiring and motivating and bringing along your product and design and strategy teams was one of the most challenging, but also rewarding things that I experienced as CPO. So the second thing is just how much there is to the job and how much there is to do, especially when you can tell some of the stakes were incredibly high given the stage we were at as a business. So when I was making this, I was like, gosh, what did a typical day look like? And I think this is probably a not unfair representation of a day. I was actually quite kind and gave myself at least some 15 minutes breaks and a little bit of time to eat lunch in this imaginary but pretty normal day. So, you'll have like a high stakes customer meeting where you have to negotiate with the customer, listen to them, understand them, try to get them to sign the renewal, and negotiate on the feature that may or may not make it into the roadmap this year. So pretty intense. And then the next one is a prioritization meeting for a product where you've got 3 really important things and you can do one of those things, another high stakes meeting, and then going into an executive team one-on-one and all of the dynamics that come with that. And then CPO role is quite an external facing role, so many days would involve some external briefing, whether of a journalist or prepping for a talk. I was actually very kind in this one and gave myself some time during the calendar day to prep and then brief a journalist, another high-stakes interaction, and then eat lunch. And then direct report one-on-one, because actually it's not about you, right? They've got so much going on as well. In fact, all the things you have going on, they have going on just in a different way with different people on a different level. And so having to be very present for that, and then straight into probably editing you can interchange this with regulatory white paper response or marketing collateral response or the blog post or whatever else. And that requires you to jump into deep work and actually really think about it and then jump back up again, though AI definitely is helping in that regard. And then into a candidate interview, because you still need to hire, it's just that you've got less headcount. So everything actually becomes higher stakes even, because your margin for error for hiring the wrong person is much, much lower. And then straight into a company-wide meeting where you need to get up on stage and just inspire and motivate and lead. And then a little bit of time to breathe. And then into a weekly standing meeting, which is just a high-stakes diplomacy with lots and lots of other departments and almost certainly defending the product team and decisions that we've made. And then I would always draw the hard line at 6 so I can go see my children and put them to bed. And then sometimes go back on again. So, this is a typical day. And then you do this again the next day, and then again the next day, and then again the next day, and again, and again, and again, and again. And it's not the content, right? Because actually, I'm very lucky. I work with really smart, motivated people, lots of interesting customers and clients. The content for all of these interactions individually are all, at least for me, are in the top right quadrant of the energy matrix, right? They are energizing. It's just the sheer volume of them. I call it too much job. And so one thing I realized was that for me to be the kind of person and leader that I wanted to be and also get the job done required me to actually be much, much more intentional about how I operated and how I managed my day. So I started my career on the trading floor, the biggest trading floor in Europe. So I've seen what things look like when people are under a lot of stress, and was very intentional about what kind of leader that I wanted to be and what kind of person and colleague and mum and partner that I wanted to be as much as I could. And that was to show up with intention every single time. And then to do that, I had to really understand my energy, my weaknesses, and also how I operated. And so I've got a bit of detail. This is very specific to me, but I do think some of this advice probably is more general. So first, just on, managing your energy, right? Really tracking it, understanding it, and energy magically isn't going to come out of everywhere. So for me, that was sleeping well and making sure I started the day with intention, managing my calendar. So that's where the bits of, carving out time to actually prep stuff, read stuff, do stuff, and then being very conscious that I needed to have time for reflection so that I can continue to improve, so carving out time for that. And of course, this is going to sound very trite, being very kind to yourself at the same time. The second piece, I think, is probably more interesting as from a product point of view, which is mitigating your weaknesses. So the nice thing about doing coaching and being coached is that you really start to understand your habits and your weaknesses. And I think it's pretty clear, right? For me, there were two things that were particularly important. And I think what I would say about weaknesses for leadership is don't hide them, because then your weaknesses start being the limit on what your team can achieve. Don't want to be the leader who is the bottleneck on your team. And so I go the other way, which is like reflect and understand my weaknesses, get lots of feedback, and then just share them out there, right? And then you can actually discuss this with your team and other people, and then you can create the systems and processes that then help mitigate your own weaknesses so that you're not the bottleneck anymore. And for me, it's like two examples. So one is obviously product expertise, right? I'm pretty new to product. Yes, I've seen it from the other side, but I haven't run so many cycles within product management itself. And so really then leaning on people, certain people on my team, and especially one of our principal product managers who was really passionate about product practice, who then actually took a lot of that work with our IC product managers and helped mentor and coach them, and also help mentor and coach me as well in some of the things I was doing. That's a very lucky place to be. And then second weakness for me is definitely around like really taking processes. I love creating them, but like following them all the time in that operating rhythm. I think the luxury of coming from some of the more strategic roles is that you don't always have to do that every day. And so working really closely then, in this case, with program management, who actually worked together with them to set up the processes, and then they ran the processes and kept me accountable as well. And then the last one is the superpower, right, of being a leader is being able to delegate to people and really delegating. Of course, you've got to agree with them, right? Don't just throw work at people. But then the second is then trusting and empowering them. Delegating is one thing, but there is the actual genuinely trusting that they will do the work and that they will come to you if they have blockers on it. And then using this as the opportunity to coach. It takes some self-awareness to know when you just need to like get out of the way and when you need to come in and help. And it's much more about supporting them than it is about you. And doing all of this and managing these processes did give me a little bit of space so that I could breathe and so I could show up with intention. I don't think so far I've had any sessions that I regret. Doesn't mean that I'm calm and zen in every session, but I think at least from a work point of view, fortunately not with my toddlers, I have managed to show up with intention every time. And now the last bit I want to just go over is just more how the role is evolving. So many of you have been in product for quite a long time, and you've seen how product has evolved over the last 10, 20 years. What I'm going to focus on is not that, but much more what's been happening with the role in the last 3 years. So Products That Count publishes a CPO report every year where they go and survey and interview lots of CPOs. And they've been doing this now for 3 years. This is the data from the latest report, and it's incredible. So the number of CPOs in Fortune 1000 companies has gone up 10 times. Wow, 10 times, right? People love 10 times, to 40%. 70% of CPOs now manage a P&L. I think this data is probably a bit more US-centric. I think this number is slightly lower in Europe. And CPOs, as you probably heard from Lindsay earlier, are owning the AI agenda, which, let's be honest, is the agenda all boards care about right now. So unsurprisingly, given these stats, CPOs are making it to president and CEOs at a rate higher than their peers now, according to the report. And so let's just break this down, because this actually makes a lot of sense. So the first is just that, like, let's function by function. So marketing used to own the voice of the customer. But actually in the last few years, and I'm surprised it's taken so long, given that some of these frameworks are on user-driven continuous discovery, ideal customer profile, continuous customer research, right? This is owned by product. And then marketing also used to be much simpler in some ways, because it's about getting people down your funnel, and you reach, especially in the B2B context, you reach people by, you call them, you email them, you go to events. Well, no one is answering the phone anymore. No one replies to emails. And even events itself is changing how you engage with events. Product-led growth, which the talk before me was all about, is becoming much more influential, which then actually implies that the the acquisition, the adoption, the monetization, and the retention is actually just a core part of the product itself. What does this mean for things like attribution or sales incentive plans? And then there's technology. So CTOs have always been incredibly powerful because they own the security agenda, the cloud agenda, the infrastructure, investment. And yet what people are talking about strategic today is about the data strategy, the AI strategy, and that's increasingly being owned by product. And then lastly, finance. Finance has always been an incredibly important function and a very powerful one. And a lot of mergers and acquisitions, for example, a lot of companies are a combination of just lots of other smaller companies put together. You put their top line and their bottom line together, bam, you've got a bigger company. Yet, if having a coherent product strategy actually drives better outcomes, which the data seems to suggest it does, then even mergers and acquisitions is becoming increasingly product-driven. And of course, pricing and monetization and packaging, increasingly product-driven. You're like, whoa, this is amazing, right? Hello, CPOs. More power. Wallet is your oyster. Well, yes, in many ways. But on the flip side, what I just showed you was departments, but they're not really departments, right? They're people. We're talking about the chief marketing officer and their team, the chief sales officer or revenue officer and their team, the chief technology officer and their team, the chief financial officer and their teams. And this creates these changes in power, responsibilities, ways of working, actually create incredibly complex people dynamics. You can imagine that for some people, especially for those of you who haven't always been in product, can see, like, depending on where someone worked and when, they may have a completely different perspective on what the role of product management is and what the role of CPOs are. People are humans and change is hard. And yet, most of these changes we're discussing have actually only been in the last 3 years, or maybe max 5 years. That's an incredibly short amount of time for people to be adapting to new ways of working. And yet, you need to work with all of these people to actually be able to achieve anything within your business. And so, what I realize is that the CPO role, and just product management in general, is a lot of it is about just like high stakes diplomacy and influencing and coaching of other functions, if that's the direction you want to go as a company. And then even beyond the people dynamics, there's also just the work, right? As CPOs, like 70% of CPOs in that survey now own a P&L. I think for most people, that is new functional knowledge, new responsibilities, new technologies, which we talked about a lot today, and also new ways of working. You need to be continuously learning. And this is on top of that day job. It's a lot. And I think, actually, and this is the ode to the squiggly career people, I think this is where people with more unconventional careers actually can really use their superpowers, right? Because this is a continuous self-directed learning on top of your day job. Ooh, that sounds really familiar. Because having an unconventional career usually meant that you've had to do a lot of continuous learning, often very self-directed. You've been able to see other perspectives by the nature of just having been those people at some point. And you embrace change because you got your squiggly career by changing roles and embracing innovation. And so it actually, from my experience and also been borne out the data, is that because it is such a new role, and yet it's so impactful, and it's still evolving, the Chief Product Officer role actually is very unique in that it offers people with more squiggly careers, and the data bears this out, from a bigger range into the role, and then also offers this jumping off point, right, to whatever you want to do next, whether that's president, CEO, founder, GM, something else. And so it's actually, I think, an incredibly exciting time to be the people who define where this role is going and what the future of it looks like. Scary, but very exciting. And so I think I was advised, like, end on a high note. I definitely think it's an incredibly exciting time to be in product. Here's some of the things that I found challenging, but I also find rewarding. And if I had to distill it into 3 bullet points, here is the whole talk. So the first one is just understanding the environment that you're operating in, therefore what kind of CPO you need to be an intentional leader, and then be curious and continuously learning about the future. And I think you're all going to do brilliantly. And I'm really excited to see what the future takes as product people. Thank you.